Have you always wanted to learn how to dehydrate your food to store in your pantry, to have food for emergencies, to be able to put away your garden produce at the end of the season, or take advantage of grocery store sales, but you've never known where to start? Well, today, let me help you. I'm Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry, and I want to become your dehydrating BFF. And I want to help you walk through how to pick the right dehydrator, how to get started, what tools that you need in order to dehydrate food for your pantry and your family. So let's get started. The first thing that you're going to need when you're going to dehydrate food is you need a dehydrator of some sort. Yes, you could get an air dehydrator. You could do one that you could hang outside. You could get one that is solar generated. Those typically have to be built. The ones that are air dryers that are like these stackable net things that are great for people who live in low humidity climates, or if you have a place in your home where you get a lot of airflow that you can do inside and do herbs and light greens and things like that. But for the most part, you're probably going to want an electric dehydrator. So quickly, let's talk about the two types of dehydrators that are mostly what's available on the market today. Okay, so when you're choosing a dehydrator, you have two options in most cases. You're going to have a cabinet style machine. Sorry, we're in the middle of processing stuff right now. So if you can see, I'm going to take the trays out. So you can see the fan is at the back. I've pulled out some of the stuff we've been drying right now. What it's doing is pushing all of the air across all of your trays evenly, mostly. Sometimes you might have to do a little rotation from front to back. If the back side is drying a little faster than the front side, you can rotate that tray, but you don't have to sit and work on that as much as you do if you were using a stackable machine. They almost all will come with a temperature adjustment. This particular machine, which is one of the new Excaliburs, actually does a, when you change the temperature, you can do it from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Is it not going to do it for me right now? I think that's, yeah, we can change it either way, just holding the button. And you also have a timer. Most digital machines like this will have a timer on it. The timer doesn't matter because the food doesn't dry by the timer. The food dries if it's dry or not. Use the timer just as a way to check your food. Don't ever go by that my food should be dry in 8 hours, because it doesn't work that way. So it's not about the brand so much, because most machines are good. It's what money you have to spend, how much space you have, and how much you need to dry at one time. Okay, so the next version we have here is a stackable dehydrator. Mine happens to be a Nesco. It's a stackable machine with 7 trays. Some of these machines can actually, if you can find more trays, you can extend them. You'll have to look at the manual of the one that you purchased to see what the maximum number is that it will work. Stackable machines tend to be a lot less expensive than the cabinet style. These usually run under $120 for most machines. This particular machine has its fan on the top right here. This is the heat and the fan that runs, and it blows air from the top down. So what you'll want to do as you're drying, especially if you're looking at a longer drying time, you'll want to rotate all of these trays once or twice through that process so that everything gets its time in front of the heat and the fan. Otherwise, what you may find is that the stuff on top dries a whole lot faster than the stuff on the bottom. Depending on what kind of food it is and what temperature you have it set at, it may also mean that some things can actually turn brown because they're spending too much time in front of the heat, and you may have had it set too high. So talking about the temperature, this one has a gauge. It does not have a timer. You don't need the timer. The timer is there just to tell you that time has passed. It does not tell you if your food is done. So we have a full range of temperature here for this one. It also gives you the delineation between Fahrenheit and Celsius for this particular machine. So the benefits of a stackable: they're smaller, they're less expensive, they can be expanded. Some of them can. You have to check that manual because some can't. I use mine outside all the time. This is what I'll use to put things that are stinky. I'll put them outside with this machine. I've had this one for a long time. It runs perfectly well. It costs about $100 right now, I think, on Amazon, and it's great. So if you don't want to spend more money on the cabinet style, this is a lot smaller. It's a lot easier to tuck away. The thing that I look for first when determining whether a machine is worth purchasing, does it have a temperature gauge on it that goes anywhere from 95 to at least 160? So if your dehydrator does not have that temperature adjustment on it, it's running anywhere from 145 to 160 F, which is about 63 to 71 C. That means that it could be anywhere in that range. Most of them will be in that temperature range to do jerky, because that's where it keeps the safer temperature for doing meat. But those temperatures are too hot to do things like strawberries or herbs, because you start losing flavor, you can start losing nutrients because you're running them at too high of a temperature. And in the case of strawberries, you may actually burn them because if the sugar content is high, it's going to caramelize under those hotter temperatures. So if you're choosing one, make sure yours has a temperature adjustment. Now, does that mean that the one that you have right now that you're using is bad? No, it doesn't. It's not perfect, but if you're drying your food and you're getting it put in your pantry, good job. The second thing I look for is wattage. Most dehydrators run around the 600 watt level. Okay, there's ranges, but most of them are running around 600 watts. Those are the ones that you want to stick with. If it goes higher to 1,000 watts, that's great. But when you get to the lower end on the expense level of machines, those tend to run really low in wattage as well, because it's one of the ways they keep the machine on the inexpensive side. If you spend $40 on a brand new Presto, the stackable machine they have, I think it's 250 or 350 watts. It's a very low end machine. Not that you can't use it, but know that the lower end of the wattage means it's going to take longer for things to dry. When you get up to 600 watts, that's about average about what things dry at, and that's what the test of times were done for. And that's just average, and that's where you can stick. So if you're using between 600 and 1,000 watts, your food is going to dry faster than if you're using the low end. Does that mean it uses more energy? It does. But remember, you're drying for less time, so it kind of balances itself out in the long run. So you've chosen your machine. You can go with the stackable, or you can go with the cabinet, whichever one that you want. Cabinets range anywhere from around $125 to a lot. You don't need to go to the a lot stage. I stick from 125 to about 250. That's the range that I would suggest you stay in if you have the money. Yes, there are some more expensive machines. They're perfectly great. If you want to spend it on them, that's fine. I would really stick though with good name brands. Excalibur, Nesco, Colzer, Magic Mill, Kasori, and there's a number of other ones. I'm going to leave you a link down in the description box below on my recommendations of all the machines that I would say that are good, but you can at least look at that and see all the qualities that I look for when trying to determine if a machine is good or not. There are also stackables. Nesco is the stackable that I would go with every time. So which machine do you pick? Now that's going to determine the size of space that you have to put a machine in. You want to measure that out first because it matters. You need a little space between the wall and your machine, and if your machine is too big for that space, you're not going to get good airflow, which means the machine may not work well. You also need to determine how tall of a space that you have, because some machines are really tall, or you may want to stack your stackable up higher, and you need to know how much space you actually have for that. And then you need to know how much you want to put out. So if you have a really large garden and you're going to have a lot of extra produce, you're wanting a bigger machine to be able to put more into. If you're doing occasional snacks and just some stuff, you can go with a smaller machine because you don't need to be producing that much at once. So think about those things. The third thing to really look for about which machine to choose after you've done that initial temperature and wattage is how much money do you have to spend. You can go to Amazon. I have a link down below. I'll leave you in the description box. You'll have to go down there. And then it's a whole guide on how to choose your machine and all the machines that are broken down by budget that can help you choose what's in your budget. But remember, go look on Facebook Marketplace. Go look at a thrift store. Put the word out to your friends and family that you're interested in learning how to dehydrate. And maybe they have a machine they're not using that they're willing to give you for free. So try all those things. It's easy to make the choice. Stick with your choice and just go for it. So, do we need tools? Are there anything else that we need with that? Besides the basic knife and cutting board, let's talk about some of the tools you need, you might want, and they're not necessary, but are kind of fun to have. Okay, so the first tool that I recommend to have for your dehydrator is something to line the trays with. The thing is that some trays you can put things right on, but it becomes a little problematic to get them back off. Either they stick, or you can't easily just pick up the tray and dump it, and you need something to help make that easier. In the long run, it means you're not cleaning those trays, you're cleaning the tool. It helps pick up things easier and put them into jars easier, or bags, or whatever you want to use. And it makes cleanup in the end a lot easier. So my recommendations are this. My favorite one is a mesh that's like this. You can either have a hard plastic mesh, and this is not the plastic canvas stuff in the arts and crafts section. That stuff is not food grade. This is food grade. So either a mesh like this, or this is a silicone mesh that's a little more pliable, and it's a little easier to mess with. It's a little easier to clean because you can get it smaller. But this is what I use on the majority of the projects that I have. It means I can pick things up, I can turn it like this, I can put it into my tray, I can flip it like this, and things come right off. They rarely ever stick to the mesh. I use both interchangeably, it doesn't really matter, but this is what I use primarily. I invested in a couple of sets for each machine so that I can have something to load up and get ready for the next load, or I can put one layer on top of another layer in order to smush down greens so they get a little smaller and slide into the machine easier. I have 2 sets always, just in case. Another thing that you want to use is something that's like a fruit leather sheet in order to do fruit leathers, or things that are liquid, or things that can be really sticky and you don't want to put on the mesh, or maybe they will drip a lot. You might want to use something that's a fruit leather sheet. Now this happens to be an Excalibur one, but there are versions of this that are generic that you can buy on Amazon. These are my favorites right here because I think they work better than anything that I have. Just happens to be my favorite. Doesn't matter what you use. But this is what I use otherwise because it's really good non-stick and things just peel right off, and it makes it to where things don't drip. There are also these versions, which is a silicone lipped tray and by the way, almost everything I'm going to show you comes in a circular version as well if you're using a Nesco or a couple of other varieties. Amazon has all of it. I'll have that link below if you won't look. But this is a lip tray. You can see right here, it's a silicone sheet that has a lip around it so that when you pour things onto it, it doesn't spill over the edge. When you're doing fruit leather, your fruit leather liquid should be thick enough that you could pour it on the tray, spread it out some, and it's not going to go over the edge. That's the best fruit leather to have. But if you want to use this for the added protection, use it. But if you don't want to invest in this yet because you don't really know what you need, you can always just use baking paper. This is parchment paper in the US, baking paper in other parts of the country, non-stick paper for some of you. It is something that you can reuse once or twice, maybe a third time, depending on what you're putting on it. But if you put wet things on it, don't reuse it. It's just a safe food handling thing. But if you're putting dry food on here, like greens and herbs and stuff, you could probably use it 2 or 3 times and it'll be just fine. You can cut this down to any size that you need it, and it will work for most things that you're doing. I know I have friends who use this primarily, they never use anything else, and that's cool. I also know that some people like to use cloth. It's 100% cotton that you can cut from pillowcases or bed sheets or just go buy from the store. Try to use white, non-bleached kind of cloth that is 100% cotton with no other synthetic fibers in it. You can use some pinking shears to cut the edges where it's got that little zigzag that will help the frame, or you can sew it if you like, if that's what you do. Then you can just toss those into the washing machine when you're done. There's one last thing that you kind of need. The next tool that you really need is, once you've done all this work, what are you going to store it in? You need an airtight container. That means that when you put the lid on the thing that you're using, there is no exchange of air in or out. It does not mean that the air inside is gone, but what it means is that air doesn't go inside of it and air doesn't come outside of it because it's airtight. So that means you can use canning jars, you can use commercial jars that you get from the store. As long as that airtight seal on the top is there, you're good. You can use really good plastic containers that are like the hard plastic sides that have a really good seal on them. When you close them, you don't want the cheaper stuff that when you squeeze it, you hear the air coming out of it, because that's not airtight. You can use food saver bags with a vacuum sealer if you happen to have one of those. The thing about those is that sharp edges on dehydrated food can make micropunctures in that plastic, and over time it starts to let air in. So you can either double bag it or wrap it in paper bags or paper towels and then vacuum seal it. That kind of helps with that. Or you can use something like Mylar, which is something that a lot of campers use, or people who do really long-term food storage use. But if you don't have money that you want to invest in a bunch of stuff, just use jars that you get from the store. Now, the next tool I'm going to talk about is not necessary. It's helpful, but not necessary. And people ask me all the time, do I need to add anything inside the jar to store your food? You do not. Okay, you do not have to add anything as long as your jar is airtight and you're storing food in the right size jar. Let's take this. Storing in this jar right now is the last of my tomato powder that I haven't used up. Now, while there are some other tools that you probably already have in your kitchen, like a food processor or a grater, Okay, so the next stage of this is also a storage thing, because people will always ask, do I have to put anything inside the jar to protect my food? Ultimately, no. If you're storing your food in the right size jar that's airtight, or the right size container, whatever you're using, you're good, because that's all it really needs. But some people like to go a little extra step to make sure that their food is stored properly. In that case, we're talking about using a moisture absorber to help mitigate the moisture that might be in the jar from the little extra air that's in there, or if you open the jar a lot and you are in a humid environment, every time you open that jar, moisture is introduced into the jar. So they may use a moisture absorber just to help use that. Never use this to finish the job. Use it to help stop moisture in the future, okay? I use this occasionally on fruit, and I use this occasionally in my powders to help, because powders can clump with moisture, so I'll put this in the jar to help mitigate that moisture. Now, you might want to use an oxygen absorber, which mimics the vacuum sealing process. It takes out all of the oxygen in that environment and helps your food last longer if you're trying to store for a long time. Now, again, 2 to 3 years is optimal for most foods, depending on what it is. Heartier potatoes and things like that can go a little longer. But if your jar is airtight, you really don't need that at all, but people like to use them just in case. What you can't do with these is that once you have to replace the oxygen absorber. They are a one-use time. You put it in, you let it do its thing. A year later, you open that jar. If you want to store it for a while again, you've got to replace the oxygen absorber, because it will be used. So do I use these? I don't use these because I don't need them. Even when, I know we're not talking about freeze drying food, but even with my freeze dried foods that I've started putting up, I am not planning on keeping those for 25 years, so I don't use this. So if you don't want to use moisture absorbers, you don't want to mess with O2 absorbers, so what you can use instead is a vacuum sealer. If you already happen to have something like a Food Saver vacuum sealer that you use to vacuum seal things for the freezer, it usually came with a hose. You can get a specialty cap for it that you can put on top of your jar, and then you can run your machine and it will vacuum seal for you. But what's come out in the last 2 years or so are these handheld vacuum sealers. Now, Food Saver had one 4 years ago-ish that I used for a long time. But it died because the battery just didn't last forever, and it finally gave way. And so I was on the search for something new. And these are the things that are coming out now that are great. The one I recommend will be down in the description box below. I tested a bunch of them. I'll leave that up here for you so that you can see how they all work. But this is the one I use all the time if I'm going to vacuum seal. Again, it's not necessary, but it's helpful. How it works is you take your jar with no ring, put your lid on, you put your vacuum sealer on top of it, and you turn it on. And what it's going to do is pull the air out of the jar, which means it's pulling out anything in there, the moisture and the oxygen that can make your food go bad over time. But again, if your jar is full of food and you're storing it properly with the lid on, that's all you need, okay? So let's pretend this is finished. We're going to take this out, take off the lid, you're done. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to put the ring on it, okay? Put the ring on it. This is not canning, this is dehydrated foods. The thing is that over time, that seal might fail. Just like in canning, sometimes those seals fail. Once that seal fails, it's allowing air to come in if you don't have the ring on it, which means that while this probably won't go bad, you may have to rehydrate it because it started to absorb some moisture. But this makes it to where if that ever failed, you're still protected. You're still okay. Maybe you have a mandolin, or maybe you even have some kind of food chopper. And my favorite is the Full Star Veggie Chopper, which I can put some food in there, chop it up into small bits. I love that thing to death because it makes processing food a little easier for me. They're kind of like duplicate tools. Your knife can handle that. Whether you're making onions into onion powder, you're making your greens into green powder, which I use a ton of to supplement our food all the time. I use mushroom powder to make an umami seasoning that I add to all the time. These are basically dried greens, anywhere from lettuce to kale to spinach to all those kind of greens that I dry and then powder up like this. These are just dried mushrooms that I run through a grinder and make a powder. They're really great, versatile things that I use in my house all the time, probably more than just about anything else that I dry. These are the things I use most. But how do I get that powder? I use either a small coffee grinder like this that has a dedicated cup that I can take out, remove, and clean. It makes it so much easier. This is a Kasori version, but there's a lot of them out there. I also use a bullet blender like this. Now my particular model isn't available anymore. There is another version, a newer version of this Ninja now that is a dedicated bullet blender, but you can get the Magic Bullet. There are a lot of those out there. This is what I do for mid-range things when I'm trying to do enough to fill a cup like this that I'm doing. These work well too. And the last thing is you can use your regular blender. Now, in doing some things, a lower end blender won't work as well because some of this stuff gets really hard and it's hard to blend, but it's really great for greens and things like that. You want a decent blender in order to do things like carrots and other hard pieces of food. So you want something that's on the higher end. I don't mean that you have to go buy a Vitamix, but you don't want the $20 blender for that. So these are the basic tools that I use every day when I'm dehydrating my food. There are other tools that you can use that might make things a little easier for you. I'm going to leave a list down below where you can kind of go browse through what I recommend for those other tools, but these are the basics. Really all you need is your dehydrator, a knife, and a cutting board. That will take care of most of what you need, and then having something to store it in later. Now, if you want to learn how to use your machine and how to actually dry something in it, go through the whole process, watch this video right here where I walk you from start to finish on how to do it. And until I see you again next time, happy dehydrating. And remember, nevertheless, she preserves. See you later.